So here we are in Microsoft Flight Simulator at the default Liverpool John Lennon Airport in the UK to look at a new release for the simulator, and this is the aircraft that you can see in front of me, which is the DC-6 from Douglas, made by developer PMDG. Now, this package, you get two airplanes in it. You get the DC-6A and you get the DC-6B. If you don't know what those are, one of them's the passenger version and one of them's the cargo version. We're looking at the passenger version here. Now, first a little bit about the package itself and the developer. If you've been into flight simulators for a long time, I'm sure you will have heard of PMDG. That's the Precision Manuals Development Group. But if you've never heard of PMDG, they've been around since the early 2000s. They started out, as the name suggests, by making manuals for flight simulators. They didn't actually originally start making actual add-ons for flight simulators. They just made the manuals, which is why they were called the Precision Manuals Development Group. But it wasn't very long before they started making actual add-ons, and I think the first one they made for a flight simulator was for Fly, the flight simulator, which you may or may not remember. I think they made a 767 for that, if I recall correctly. But it wasn't long before they started making stuff for Microsoft Flight Simulator. The first one that they made for Microsoft Flight Simulator, I think, was the Boeing 737 NG 600 and 700 way back in 2003. Which was really one of the first really fancy add-ons for a flight simulator, and they've kept that tradition up over the years, and they've made stuff for Microsoft Flight Simulator and P3D, and now this new version of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they are one of the really well respected developers. But there are two things to watch out for on that, that sometimes their stuff can be really complicated and difficult to learn, and the other thing is that sometimes it can be quite pricey. However, with this add-on, it is complex, but it's not difficult to learn. There are a lot of built-in aids that will teach you how to fly this thing really, really well. It does come with a lot of manuals, but you don't worry, you don't have to sit studying them for ages to get up and running, as I will demonstrate in this sort of overview of the thing. The other thing is that there's a bit of a reputation for PMDG stuff being quite expensive, but that's not true either in this case, because this thing is $54, which works out at about just over 40 quid. Now, that's expensive in terms of other flight simulator add-ons, but when you see how complicated and detailed and realistic this thing is, you'll pretty soon realize that that's actually very, very good value indeed. Anyway, let's have a look at this thing. So, here we are, the DC-6. Now, I don't think you need me to tell you that this is a really, really beautiful model, and we've got lots and lots of sort of exterior stuff on display at the moment, engineers, steps, and lots and lots of detail on there. Even the oil drip trays under the engines and things like that, customized towing truck and so on and so forth, and working air stairs on the front there, which are animated and fold up into the aeroplane, and then a set of stairs on the back. So let's have a little bit of a closer look at this. So I'm going to switch to the drone camera view, and you can see there that this thing is really, really nicely modeled. Good detail on it. When we look at it sort of from a distance, all the sort of rippling on the skin is done and all that kind of stuff. And this is a very, very accurate model, both outside and in, because you've got an entire cabin modelled on the inside of the thing with really, really very nice detail. So we are talking about a really, really nice model that stands up to really, really close inspection, beautifully textured. So there's kind of just before we even get into the sort of detail levels of the thing, the sort of thing that you can expect from PMDG, and it's well in keeping with their usual standards of very, very good quality modelling. Now, if I come off that drone view and back onto this external view, so yeah, if I move the view around, you might be able to make out, as you look at the skin, all of the sort of dents and ripples on the skin, the aeroplanes. You can see it against the reflection there that they get from when they're sort of riveted, and the skin stretches a little bit from being pressurized and depressurized. You can see all that kind of detail is on there. So this is a really, really decent model. Now, the same continues when we get inside. Now, one of the things that's a little bit scary about PMDG stuff is that because it tends to be sort of very realistic and very detailed, you're probably looking at this thing and thinking, oh my god, I'm going to have to be reading manuals for days on end before I can even turn the parking brake off or what have you. But that was a bit of a dodgy landing from that plane in the distance there. But that's not true, because there is this thing in the cockpit which will assist you. I'll just show you these things here. It's got a little ramp manager, which we're on at the moment. It's got a fuel load manager where you can load all the passengers and cargo and stuff like that. It's got this thing here, which is an artificial flight engineer who can help you with operating your aeroplane. So even if you don't read the manuals, this guy can help you out. You can see there before start, after start, and all this kind of stuff. And more on that in a moment or two. And then what you've got is you've got a maintenance thing there, because this models all of the realistic damage on the engines and the systems and stuff like that. And you can see there on this thing that I've been running this a little bit. So my engines have got about 2.5 hours use on them, and my propellers have got a little bit of use on them. But if I want to fix these things, I can simply click on this, so you can see there, propeller hours, 9 hours on that. But if I click that, there they are, back to being new. So if you want to fly your thing realistically and look after it, you can do all that kind of stuff. And we can see that the engine oil quantities are on there. And if we want to top things up, we can do that. And I've got 19 and a half hours on this airframe, but if I could sort of repair it and all this kind of stuff, and then we've got the water alcohol quantity and the auxiliary oil quantity, so I can start boosting these things and topping them up and all that kind of stuff. Then if you're thinking that the engines will be difficult to manage, well, one, your artificial flight engineer can help you out, and two, there is this engine stress visualizer which we'll see when it gets going, and it will warn you about whether things are being overstressed. It's got this sort of color coding system down here. More on that when we start the thing up. And then you've got an options thing on there where you could, if you wanted to, turn off the realistic engine damage, and you could have it do a simpler start if you wanted to, and you can have realistic carb icing and realistic failures, and you can have it have a realistic autopilot engage, or you can use a simpler autopilot on it. If you want to use a GPS on the thing, you can, or if you want to turn that off, you can use more traditional radio navigation. And you'll notice that if you think this thing's a bit dim, you can brighten it up a little bit. So we'll get to what all this is in a little while. Now you can see the other thing that's on the ramp manager is all that exterior stuff that I've got on there. So I can get rid of the tow bar tractor, and I can get rid of the wheel chocks, and I can get rid of the pitot covers, and I can get rid of the engine oil pans off the bottom of the engines, and get rid of the aircraft engineer steps, and I can get rid of the ground power unit like that. And then over here we've got front cabin exit and front cabin stairs. Now I'll change that in a minute because I want to show you something with this, but we'll get main cabin stairs away, main cabin exit away, and cargo holds closed. Obviously that differs a little bit if you're on the full-on cargo version. So what we've got is the front cabin stairs and the front cabin exit. So that if we look there, is those stairs that you can see there. If we go on the exterior view, it's those little folding air stairs that are on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring those up like that. So we go front cabin stairs, click that, and it doesn't just get rid of them, it folds them all up, and you've got realistic sounds for it, and in it comes, and then they are stowed. And then if we go and look where they are, there you go, there's the stairs stowed on the thing. So really, really beautifully animated. So we'll close the exit on there, and we've got that now. So here we are on the interior of the thing, and just before I take you through what all this stuff is, I'm not going to go, don't worry, I'm not going to go mental on it, but I will point out the main features of this thing here. Now this the DC-6 dates from just after the Second World War. You'll notice that I folded a step down there, a little seat down there, which I can fold back up if I want. Now that's an era where you typically had a pilot, a co-pilot who would quite often do navigation stuff, and what you would very often have is another 1 or 2 crew members. Sometimes you'd have a navigator and a flight engineer. Sometimes you'd just have a flight engineer, and the flight engineer would sit on this seat here, and he would typically be on that seat there because he would be the guy working the engines. So you would be the pilot in command, and you would ask him, set takeoff power or set cruise power or what have you, and he would be adjusting that stuff. You could operate it yourself if you wanted to, but because he's sat in that position there, what he would be able to do is he would be able to get to all of these switches here to control other systems on the aeroplane. So he was doing all of what you'd expect a flight engineer to do, all of these sort of engine controls here, all of the throttles and what have you, and then all of this stuff back here. And all of this stuff works. You can see there cabin heaters, and you can see there dome lights, and then if we get down here, it's going to be a bit more sort of sort of different compartments and all this lot that you can control. And then you can see there the heaters and for the wings, and the cowl flap motors and all of that stuff, and he'd be working that. And here's the radios that he could work on and stuff like that. So he did a lot of stuff, but in this simulator version, what we have is we have an artificial one who you can have do all that stuff for you if you want to. So if you're thinking that this is like, oh my god, this looks really, really complicated, it has the potential to be complicated, but it can actually be made really simple to help you out. Now, in relation to that, if you want to go mental and start operating all this stuff yourself, you can do. There are 4 PDF manuals that come with this thing, as you'd expect from a company whose name is the Precision Manuals Development Group. There are 2 tutorial PDF manuals. There is a sort of quick introduction manual, and then there is a main pilot operating handbook which runs to several hundred pages. Now, it is worth reading, but as I will demonstrate, you do not have to read it to get going on this thing. So if you like the idea of having a complicated and realistic aeroplane, yes, you can have that, but what you can do is you can get up and running with the thing, and as and when you sort of progress with it and learn various bits of it, then you can look in the manual. So don't fret and think, oh my god, this thing's going to take me ages to learn. There is a lot that you can learn with it, but you can fly it easily if you want to. So let's have a look at how you go about that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of different things in this cockpit that move and work and stuff like that. It's very, very realistic. I'll give you an example of that. You can open the window, but you'll see that it's locked, so we have to unlatch it, and now we can slide it open because this is a pressurized aeroplane. So obviously when you slide the window shut, it needs to press against there and seal. So there you go. So you'll see it close and seal so that you can pressurize the aeroplane, and you can do the same thing on the other side. You'll notice that those switches work and all of this stuff. It doesn't really matter that you can do that, but there's all of these little switches that you can use. So we'll come back to this iPad thing in a minute that can help you manage stuff, and what I'll do is I'll give you the quick and dirty tour of the cockpit, so you can see all of the level of detail that's on this thing. I'm not going to go into massive detail about it, but I'll show you enough so that you can get an idea of how detailed this thing is. So I'm going to leave this panel and the center pedestal till last, and what we'll do is we'll look up here. So you've got some lights for the cabin. Incidentally, you can control all the lights from this thing here. You can see cockpit lighting there, or you can remove all the individual switches because there's absolutely loads of them. So you've got some cockpit lighting on there, and then if we move up here, you've got some fire extinguisher stuff with a guard cover on there, and then you've got all of your fire detection fuses on there, and then you've got more lights up there that you can operate. And then you've got, if we come here, you've got a lot of the sort of anti-icing stuff on there, and the gauges related to that. And then we come up here, and you've got all of the sort of navigation lights and engine feathering and more of the panel lights up there. And then we've got more stuff. Just getting disorientated on the on the movement there, and then more stuff related to the engine up there, prop guards and all this kind of stuff, and then more guard switches there for advancing the spark on the engines. Yes, you really actually can do that. So lots and lots of sort of complicated realistic stuff on the engines if you want, or you can leave all that to the flight engineer. And then in the middle of the overhead there, you've got all of the engine start stuff, magnetos for the engines, all of the starting things on there, all of the stuff to sort of boost the fuel and put water injection into the engines and all that kind of stuff. So you've got the left engines there and the right engines there, and then on this part of the overhead panel here, you can see we've got all of the de-icing stuff and the pitot heat and fuel quantities and all that kind of stuff, because this thing had a lot of fuel tanks on it. And then we've got landing lights there and cowl flaps there, and we've got the supercharger. It's in low at the minute for low altitude. You can flick that up onto high, and then the other supercharger controls and the gears and stuff like that are down on that central pedestal, which we'll get to in a minute. You've got all of the sort of pressurization stuff here for pressurizing the cabin. You've got all of the ammeters and voltmeters there and all that kind of stuff, and temperature controls, and all of this stuff works. There are one or two switches that do not work, but they would be really, really obscure ones. You can see that when I'm moving my mouse over this for oil dilution and all of this, there are very, very few things that don't actually work in this cockpit. You have to get to sort of things like that air vent nozzle that really wouldn't be doing much in the simulator anyway, to get to stuff that doesn't actually work. All of these like light switches and all of those dials and all that kind of stuff, it all works. So this is like a really, really massively detailed cockpit. And then what we've got is the main panel here. So I'll just take you across the main panel there. So you've got some radio equipment down there. All of that works. And then what you've got is the transponder thing there. You've got a clock there. Typical blind flying panel on there. But because this can be navigated old school using typical sort of VOR and ADF and all that kind of stuff, you've got all the gauges related to that. Don't worry, you can fly it off GPS with a standard flight plan, as I will demonstrate. So if you more prefer modern avionics, you can do that. But what we've got is we've got an airspeed indicator, we've got an artificial horizon there, we've got an altimeter there. You've got this thing for the automatic direction finder, so you can use the DF loops on it, and we'll see the avionics that you mess around with for that. You've got the outer marker, inner marker, and middle marker on there for if you're doing sort of ILS approaches in an old school way. Compass there, a few of the sort of directional gauges on there. You've got a vertical speed indicator. You've got this thing here, which is the heading indicator, which is slaved to the GPS system. So this is the one that you'd use for GPS navigation. Turn and slip indicator on there. The VOR navigation heading thing there on there. So you can do old school navigation, or you can do more modern navigation on there. If you want to do old school navigation, you're going to be typically using those two and that one there. If you want to do a bit more modern stuff, you're going to be using that and the GPS that's on the overhead that we'll see in a moment. Now you've got a bunch of oil pressure gauges, RPM gauges, all that kind of stuff, sort of cylinder head temperature gauges and all that kind of thing there. So you've got all of that for left and right engines in the middle. Then you've got a blind flying panel for the co-pilot there. And then that takes us to the center pedestal. Now this looks scarily complicated, but don't worry, it's not as bad as it looks. In the first place, you can have the flight engineer work all this stuff for you, but I will just take you through it very, very quickly. So what we've got is we've got crossfeed for fuel on there. So if you want to crossfeed the fuel tanks on there, you've got that. And then we've got fuel tank selectors there. You've got propeller pitch lever there. One lever controls the pitch for all the engines. You've got your engine number 1 throttle, engine number 3 throttle, engine number 4 throttle, and what have you. So you've got all of your 4 throttles on there and what have you. The throttle lock is off at the moment. You got this thing here for your reverse pitch on there. Now this stuff here, most of that is the radios that would have been in the original thing in like 1946. So don't worry, you don't have to use these. So you are not going to have to be winding this thing around to sort of desperately tune in frequencies and stuff like that. You can use this modern stuff up here if you want to tune the radios, or of course you can use the built-in if I can get it to display the radios. Switched off at the minute, but you could use that if you want to. That's your ADF stuff on there with your beat frequency oscillation, and this is your GPS in the middle. It will all start lighting up when I start the engines. There's your whiskey compass there. So don't worry about those things there and those things there, and most of those switches along the front of there. They're just in there because they would be originally in the aeroplane, but they're the old school radios on there. The bit that does actually work that you might want to use is the Autopilot, or as they were known back in 1946, gyro pilots. So you've got all of this stuff for working the Autopilot, but if you like, what you can do is you can select an option on that iPad, which we'll see in a minute, that will allow you to have the Autopilot function in a modern way, because the Autopilot on planes of this era were a little bit less sophisticated, but you can have a modern Autopilot if you want. And you will be pleased to know that if you've got Logitech and SATA exterior Autopilots, they work with this thing as well. So, you know, if you don't want to be messing around with this, you want to use your hardware exterior Autopilots, you can. Now I'll just move the view a little bit so that you can see what this thing looks like. So all of this old sort of VHF stuff and what have you, don't worry about that. But obviously what you can do is with sort of modern avionics and what have you, you can have a modern transponder. So you can use this on VATSIM if you want. That's that switch down there, you know, for doing your transponder stuff if you want to. So perfectly possible to use this on VATSIM. So a couple of switches for the Autopilot, but as I say, you don't actually have to use those. You can use an exterior, and then on the front of this, some switches that your virtual flight engineer would mostly be operating for you, unless you want to do it yourself. So you got your mixture levers on there, and you've got the lock for the mixture levers. You've got your carb air on there like that, and then if I move back to the pilot seat so that we can look at it this way, just to sort of give you an idea of the level of detail that's on this thing. So we've got a flap lever, which is up at the minute. We've got a gear lever, which is obviously we want the landing gear down at the moment. We've got this thing, which is a gust lock. Now what that is because it's quite a big aeroplane, they were concerned about, you know, the wind blowing the ailerons and the rudder and the elevator about and what have you. So this thing locked the controls. Now if you get this thing and you go to take off and you forget to take that thing off, you're going to be trying to pull the stick back and it's not going to move. I'm pulling my joystick back there and nothing's happening. You need to click that so it unlatches it like that, and now you can see that the controls move. So if you decide you want to buy this thing and you're like, help, I can't take off, I can't pull the stick back, yes you can. You just need to make sure that that locks off. So aileron trim there, elevator trim there like that, and rudder trim there. That's that big wheel there like that. And last but not least, this thing here, it's got a working fuel dump system on it. So if we lift that up, you can see there are the fuel dump levers on there. And if you want to, you decide that you don't want to dump that fuel, I should be able to, if I move out of the way, I should be able to close that panel again. So that's the level of realism you got. You've also got like emergency hydraulics here for the brake system and all this sort of thing. So this thing has, you know, pretty much everything that you would ever want to have working on it simulated, and a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't want to have working on it, but it works anyway. So it's well up to the standard of PMDG stuff of old. But as we'll see, if it looks complicated, if you're used to sort of things like Boeing 737s and that Aerosoft CRJ, and you think, oh, that's nice and easy in comparison, you know, because you've got PFDs and all that kind of thing, and sort of easily understandable autopilots, don't worry about it, because as we'll see, it isn't that complicated to get into. Now, what I was saying before about, you know, you can have the sort of GNS 430 to do sort of modern navigation, or you can have the old school radios if you want, and you'll notice that what we can do is we can have realistic autopilot engage if we turn that on, in which case you will have to use that gyro pilot properly, or if you prefer to use keyboard shortcuts and for sort of typical autopilot that you'd have in a modern aeroplane, or your Satec or Logitech exterior hardware autopilots, have it on the option that I've got there, and then you will be able to use those things. So if we go on the ramp manager there, so everything's closed up and what have you, and we've got a bit of fuel in the thing, and the maintenance manager, everything seems to be all right. So what we'll do is we'll go on that ramp manager there, and I can go cold and dark start, or I can go ready for start, or I can just go ready for taxi now. So if we go cold and dark start, it's going to do that, and it's going to put the ground power unit on like that, or I can go ready for start like that, and we start getting things lighting up. So you'll see all of this sort of thing lights up because we've got ground power connected, and you'll see that the avionics start spinning up and the radios will work and things like that. So we've got the radio panel now works if you like using that. And then if you want, we've got ready for taxi, where if I hit that, it's going to start the engines for us, yeah, because the automatic flight engineer will do it. So if we go ready for taxi and click that, and then I go on the exterior view, you'll see that the flight engineer is starting things for us. So I don't even need to know where the switches are on the overhead to start the engines. The flight engineer is going to start the engines for me. So we get that. Now, so you can see on the animation we've got shaking engine cowlings. And if I start sort of revving those things up, all of the engines start. So there we go. So you don't have to, if you don't want to, you don't have to know how any of that stuff works, because we are literally ready to taxi. Now you might notice something that can catch you out though. The flight engineer disregards what you do unless you hit abort. So you'll notice that on ready to taxi, what he's done is he's latched the controls again. So just be aware that that kind of thing can happen. If you want to stop things like that happening and you want to override stuff, if you go on automatic flight engineer, you can hit abort on anything that he's doing. But if you do things like before start or after start, you will hear him going through the checklist and what have you. So if we go, you can probably hear him flicking switches. Can you hear that? It's actually a South African flight engineer. South African. Now, you can hit abort on there, so you heard him say flaps 20. So he's put flaps 20, and you can see them going down and what have you. But if you want to, you can abort all this stuff if you want to. So you can turn that off if you like, but be aware that stuff can catch you out. For example, he could have put the control locks on, or if you've got your artificial flight engineer controlling the throttles because you've got cruise on and what have you, what you might find is that when you move your throttle levers, they don't move, and that could be because the flight engineer is overriding your commands. So just be a little bit careful with the automatic flight engineer, because you might find that he's doing stuff that you actually don't want him to do, which is just something to be aware of. Now I might prefer to have less than 20 degrees flaps on there, so I can change that, but flight engineer will do all that stuff for you. Now because I've hit ready to taxi, he will have put the lights on there, but I'm going to have the position lights flash on there, but you can see that the beacon light is on and what have you because of that. Now if we want to talk about the lighting on the thing, because obviously you want to see that, so if we come on this thing here, not sure which one it's on, maybe that. Okay, cockpit lighting, white. The cockpit lighting white, and then what I will do is I'll put it on a bit of nighttime, like that, and you've got that for your cockpit lighting. Or you can go red, or you can go floodlights. So lots and lots of choices for lighting, including off, of course, in which case it might be difficult to see things if you're in pitch darkness. But that's your cockpit lighting. Now on the exterior view, so you can see we've got flashing lights on the wingtips and stuff like that. And they're pretty good. Yeah, I'd perhaps prefer them to be maybe a little bit brighter than they are. But all of that works fine. So you literally don't need to know where any of the switches are. Now, if we put this engine stress thing on here, you can see everything's in the green and what have you. But if I start overcooking things by boosting the engines there, you can see that what it was doing, it was saying that, you know, I was over boosting them and it was going into the red. And it tells you what these things are. Now, you are going to see when we're climbing the thing, you are going to see some of the stuff, you know, like the mixture or what have you, might be showing as yellow, like the oil pressure is yellow. But moderate stress range, so yeah, yellow doesn't mean that you're going to be damaging the engines necessarily. For example, you have to have quite high power settings on when you're climbing, so there's a very, very good chance that some of your engine stress things are going to be showing as yellow when you're climbing it, because you have to boost the engines a little bit. But you know, that's kind of what you have to do. So this is a good guide to stuff. But you know, if it says your mixture's too lean, if you're getting red things on there or yellow things on there, then you can come down here and you can put the mixture up or down a little bit. You know, maybe put it on auto rich or what have you. I'm just gonna close that thing there because I don't want to be accidentally dumping fuel. So the control locks are off, and I've got some flaps, maybe a bit more than I actually want, since we're at a fairly large airport. And so let's go. So I will release the parking brake like that, and then let's taxi this thing. So around we go. I'm using my Satec rudder pedals to taxi this thing. But you can see that it steers very, very nicely. And when I do that, you can see the rudder pedals moving. Which is okay. And I'll just give my... Yeah, everything's in the green on the engine. So if you were concerned about this being, oh my god, this is going to be really, really complicated and it's going to take me ages to learn, you literally saw me start that thing and get it ready for taxiing without really hitting any of the switches at all. I just used that iPad in the cockpit. So I think, you know, you can see that this thing has the potential to be really, really complicated if you want it to be. But if you like the idea of a realistic aeroplane, but you don't want to spend months learning how to fly the thing before you can have some fun, then don't worry too much about it, because it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I'm going to more or less lined up for the runway, and then I'm going to hit the brakes on there. So everything's looking good. We've got 10 degrees of flaps, which is all we really need, because we're going off the runway at Liverpool John Lennon, and that's got a nice long runway. Like that. I've got sort of fairly simple weather on, so there's no really sort of dangerous winds or anything like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom the view out a little bit so that you can see the rudder pedal settings that I'm using for this. I'm going to do one last check, make sure that engineer hasn't done that on there and hasn't put any weird throttle locks on or anything like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go for it. So typically what you would do with something like this is so you got a propeller pitch lever on 100%, and then typically what you would do is you would throttle the engines up a little bit to let them build a little bit of power, and then you'd release the brakes, and then you'd go all the way like that. Now you can see that I've got like some reds on there, but you know, I haven't really got a lot of choice in the matter, because you've got to kind of power the thing up to get it going. So you can see that I don't really need a lot of rudder to keep this thing straight on the runway, and you can see the airspeed indicators looking good there, like that. So we can probably lift this thing off, but as we go, I might have to trim the nose up a little bit. So I was hitting my my nose trim on there a little bit as we go, and you can see that thing lifting off. And then what we'll do is we'll get the gear up. So I'm going to hit the G lever to get the gear up, and up it comes like that. And then let's clean up and get the flaps up as well. Now I'm going to go back in the cockpit, and what I will do is I'll hit the little Shift Z add-on that you can get from flightsim.co, like that, so that we can get a little bit of information about headings and stuff like that. Now, for this flight, what I did was I set up a flight from Liverpool to Paris Charles de Gaulle. So you can see there LFPG. So I've got it on GPS there, like that, and I am going to, on my external hardware autopilot, I'm currently adjusting the altitude. I'm going to put it on. Service ceiling of the DC-6 is about 21,000 feet, so I'm going to put it to 20,000 feet. I'm going to put vertical speed on 800, and then I'm going to hit the controls on that. So I'm putting vertical speed, altitude, and I'm going to hit nav on there, like that. And we should see this thing start steering. Now, if you haven't got one of them external hardware autopilots, don't worry about it. All you need to do is you just need to assign keyboard shortcuts for vertical speed, altitude, navigation, and turning on the autopilot. And Bob's your uncle. We're off to Paris. And just to kind of demonstrate that, there you go. You can see it's heading for the magenta line, and with a bit of luck it should start turning and heading on that magenta line. So if you were worried about this thing, you know, being, oh my god, it's old school and I'm going to have to learn all that, how to fly things properly, you can do all that if you want to. There is nothing stopping you from doing that if you want to, but this thing is heading for that magenta line, and we should see this thing make an automatic turn and start navigating. So here we go, coming over the magenta line. And there it goes. It's making that turn for the magenta line. So if you are a child of the Magenta Line, as is often the disparaging name of people who fly modern airliners, here we are going over the oil refinery at Liverpool on the other side of the estuary and what have you, and this thing looks like it's straightening up. Oh, there you go, it is following the Magenta Line. So if you were a little bit concerned about, oh my god, a PMDG airliner, they're really complicated, and an old school PMDG airliner that you have to fly things realistically on and all this sort of thing, and that was me hitting the rudder pedal, by the way, then don't worry about it, because you're there. Now you can see there, oil temperature, because I am climbing, I can pull the throttles back a little bit and probably get that. So you can see oil temperature and oil pressure. If I mess around with the throttles, you'll see these things changing and stuff like that. So there you go. So it helps you out. Now, obviously, you don't want, on a little review like this, for me to fly all the way to Paris. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disengage the autopilot. So just to give you a... just to sort of show you that I've not really cheated on this. You can probably make out some traffic moving on those roads below me. So I haven't turned the traffic off or knocked the graphics down to sort of get this to run beautifully. You can see I've got lots of trees on and things like that. So in spite of the fact that it's a fairly complicated aeroplane, it runs pretty well on my computer, which isn't the world's fastest computer. It's got an Intel i5 Kaby Lake processor, and the graphics card is an ATI Radeon RX 480, which is quite an old graphics card now. I mean, to be fair, that graphics card does have 8 gigabytes of DDR5 memory on it, but it is, it is quite an old graphics card. There's 44 gigabytes of RAM on the main board, DDR4 RAM, and the motherboard is an Asus Z270p. So, this isn't an especially flashy computer by any stretch of the imagination. Not only that, I am recording this at the moment too, which is notorious for tanking frame rates. So let's bring this thing in for a landing. So we've got $27 at Liverpool ahead of us. Trim up a little bit. We seem to be sort of pinching down a bit there. Now this thing's very draggy when you you get a full flaps down, as I've got there. And obviously you need a lot of throttle with that much flap. So don't be afraid to, you know, as I've done there, come off the flaps a little bit, you know, lose a stage of flaps. To give it a bit more of an ability to accelerate a little bit. Because if you get this thing slow coming over the fence, you could end up landing very, very heavy. And you can see I'm pretty low there. I've got 4 red pappy lights, so that's not going to help matters. Should start getting a white one in a sec. Yeah, there's one. Still a little bit below the glide slope there, but we'll go with it. I think we've got a bit of a crosswind here. Certainly looks like that. Oh, ballooned it a bit there. Yeah, that I don't think was my best landing ever. But any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. It's always a little bit difficult when you try to do a voiceover for a review and land at the same time. You know, checklists kind of go out the window. But, you know, I didn't break it, let's put it that way. So bring that in there, and what we'll do is I'll get the flaps up. And we'll just get it parked up here. Unfortunately, you don't have like working safe docks and marshallers here and what have you, so I'm probably way off the stop line. Yeah. Close enough for government work, eh? So, if we go back in the cockpit, and we have a look there, have I broken anything? Well, it would seem not. All the engines appear to be running, and if we go on the maintenance manager, even if I had, you can see their engine health, they're all in green, you know what I mean? So, so I haven't abused it terribly. Despite a somewhat terrible landing. So, of course, what you do need to do with that sort of old aeroplanes like this, if you do have all the sort of realistic engine management on, is just pulling up a little bit there. Is rather than, you know, the moment you come for a halt, throttling the engines back, what you tend to have to do is you have to sort of ease the engines down a little bit. To let them cool down. And the other thing that you would have to do is manage these cowling flaps a fair bit. I mean, I wasn't worrying about that too much, but obviously what you've got is their cowl flaps for engine 1 and engine 2 and engine 3 and what have you. And what you have to tend to do is mess around with those things, but what you would have to be watching for on the real thing is the cylinder head temperatures there, and you let the thing cool down a little bit, and when you've let the thing cool down a little bit, then you can shut the engines down. You don't sort of like have the thing throttled up like crazy for your landing because you've got massive flaps on, then taxi the thing in and immediately shut the engines down because, old engines like that, you've got to sort of look after them a little bit. So anyway, I will shut the engines down. And there you go, one very, very pretty aeroplane. The PMDG DC-6. Actually, two DC-6s in the package, the DC-6A and the DC-6B. So the freighter version and the cargo version. The freighter version and the passenger version, I should say. It's available from the PMDG website. It's $54, which equates to, I think it was 42 quid. And for that, I think it is definitely worth having. It's certainly the most realistic aeroplane available for Microsoft Flight Simulator at the moment, and very old school. But if you are put off by the idea that, it's an old aeroplane and you're going to have to know all that VOR navigation and stuff like that, clearly that is not true, because as we've seen, magenta line there, which it can follow if you want it to. But we are talking about a realistic aeroplane. Notice that I've shut the engines down, so we've got no power, and the flaps are down, and I am now hitting the flaps up button, and it's not going to raise the flaps because obviously I haven't got any hydraulic power and stuff like that. So there are things about this that, if you like your realism, it's going to do stuff like that. So there's a lot to learn on the thing, but as I demonstrated on this video, you don't have to know it all immediately. You can really jump in and fly the thing, providing you use the assistance that this thing provides. And if you really, really want to, you can go on the options and you can turn off all the damage settings on there if you want to, and then abuse the thing to your heart's content without worrying about anything. But loads of scope for learning stuff, and as I say, you don't have to immediately dive in and know absolutely everything. You can just do pretty much what I did there. Fly somewhere, manage the engines a little bit, just come back on the throttles a little bit, and just watch those watch those bands there and try and keep them in the green. And whilst you are merrily cruising away to your destination, have a read of the PDFs and things, because they are very, very well written, the manuals, and they do explain everything. They don't just go, you have to put this on this setting. They say you have to put this on this setting because of this and this and this and this. So if you like a challenge and you like learning stuff, this will certainly provide you with that. But if you just like a nice looking aeroplane that you want to fly about, it can do that too if you use all that management stuff. So as per usual with these little quick shot reviews, we come to the question of, do I recommend it? And the answer is yes, absolutely. For 42 quid, i.e. $55, $56, whatever it was, it's probably one of the best flight simulator planes that's ever been made, because it's the usual PMDG standard. It's pushing the envelope a lot, and it's on a sim that pushes the envelope a lot. I've got the graphics up like crazy, the view distance up like crazy. I mean, you can see in the distance those little wind turbines are still merrily chugging away and stuff like that. So even with all that complexity and what have you, it was still getting reasonably good frame rates with me streaming. And let me tell you, when I put the record, because I use the record system on the ATI GPU, and that tanks the frame rates like crazy, but this thing was still going well enough for me able to be talking to you and bringing it in for a landing, which is not the best landing I've ever done, but there you go. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Chuck's Hangar. PMDG DC-6, go and get it because it's great. That's all for now. Bye.